Hello, and welcome back to the SheSuite, the podcast where we sit down with women who are not just leading organizations, but shaping systems, industries, and the future of work. I am your host, Sierra Johnson Belzer. I am the founder of the Human Algorithm, which teach people to lead at human speed, and I am the CEO of Inspire Executive Solutions. Today's guest is a woman whose leadership operates at the intersection of national security, innovation, and resilience, and whose work most people never see, but all of us depend on. I'm going to introduce our speaker today. Denise is the Director of Industrial Base Strategy at Iron Will Ventures, 25 plus years advancing in national security, a former Missile Defense Agency leader, and has also supported other government and defense industry partners, architect of enterprise level supply chain and manufacturing initiatives. She is a Momentum Executive Leadership alum and mentor. Denise Harris is the proof that women don't just belong in high stakes rooms. They are often the ones quietly holding the systems together. I am so happy to have Denise Harris on here today as I kind of venture out into the government and defense space with my role as the manager for Next Stop Vets. I had the opportunity to meet Denise when we both were kind of working with Momentum. So, Denise, welcome to the She Suite. I'm so happy to have you here today. And for our listeners that are not familiar with the defense and industrial base world, or you, kind of tell us a little bit about your day to
Sure. And thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really excited about the opportunity to share a little bit about leadership in defense and the defense industrial base. As you said, my name's Denise Harris. And, at my core, I'm just a Southern girl and I grew up with cows and rockets. My husband Hudson and I just celebrated our ninth anniversary, and I've got kids ranging from 33 down to 12.
wow.
So I have this really full life, and I love it. The defense industrial base is any part of our industrial base, our suppliers, our products that produce components, materials, anything that our defense needs. And so every day I sit at the crossroads of government and industry, working to help build a more resilient defense industrial base so that our warfighter has a disadvantage. We want our warfighter going in for the unfair fight, and we want them to have it when it matters most.
I love that. And thank you so much for just kind of giving us some insight into who you are, your family, and happy anniversary.
Oh, thank you.
I think that's amazing. So you have spent over the last 25 years really working in national security and defense. So what originally drew you to this type of work?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I'm the daughter of a Marshall Space Flight Center engineer, so that's the rocket side I grew up with. And I grew up watching launches and hearing my father talk about his projects. But it wasn't until we were TDY, and so that's temporary duty, down in Cocoa Beach, Florida during the Hubble program. And while I was that was when I actually kinda clued into what I wanted to do. And what happened was I was a junior in high school, and I went to Cocoa Beach High, and whenever there was a launch, they would let all the students out into the court, the court section, the courtyard. And of course, we're out there just having a good time, and I was standing there, and then all of a sudden, you hear the engines cut off, and it was so powerful, and you could feel the vibration in the ground, and I just stood there in awe and watched how incredible this mission was, and what incredible work these teams of people were doing. And that was when I really decided I wanted to be part of something bigger, something beautiful and complex, and just do incredible things with technology.
I love hearing that story through your childhood and a child's eyes because as I fast forward now living in Huntsville, I've only been here for a year and a half now. And so I had my first tour of Blue Origin and just was in complete 5-year-old awe how big their engines are. But then once I realized that rumbling that I hear in the evenings, most of the time when I'm either in the kitchen cooking or in here doing something in my office, this rumbling noise that I hear, it's them testing the launches out at the base, but it shakes the entire house. And I have gone outside on the patio just to record. I just think that is the coolest thing. So being able to have that as a child and to kind of influence you, and then knowing that your dad was a part of all that big noise that he was making, that's just really, really a cool story, and I'm kinda envious of you. I wish I had have grown up with all of this space technology. I might have would've probably went through another career phase, who knows? Who knows what I would ended up in.
Yeah.
Your career spans systems engineering, advanced manufacturing, and enterprise strategy. So how did those experiences shape you as a leader?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. So, whenever I was working as a systems engineer, I really learned a lot about the importance of processes and accountability. I really gained insight into, development along the way, the accountability, making sure that we're building what the warfighter needs and that there's interpretation and clarity in the language. When I move over to manufacturing and industrial base and supply chain work, that's where everything became real for me. That's the execution part of it. Innovation isn't just about having a good idea. Innovation doesn't really matter in my world if I can't get it to the warfighter. And the industrial base and manufacturing and supply chain pieces of that mission make that possible. And it's really interesting in how you talked about these areas in the introduction. When everything's working, when everything's clicking, nobody hears anything about it, right? And so I just really grew passionate about what I call the place where the rubber meets the road for the warfighter. And then when I started taking all of this experience and becoming a leader and working at that enterprise level, I really put all these pieces together and focused on being able to communicate and collaborate with clarity, establish processes, and set those guardrails, things that I learned in systems engineering, around the missions that I love, the industrial base, supply chain, and manufacturing, to allow my team to execute. And so it is all about executing for the warfighter, and all of those pieces fed in to how I drive an outcome and deliver capability and capacity.
That is amazing. That is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, what does leadership look like when the stakes are national and not personal? Because for me, I've only had to deal with small little issues that might have affected just a small sector of the business. But what does it look like from a personal or national perspective?
Yes, also another good question, because the stakes when you're working at a national level or you're working in defense, they're always personal, and that's because lives are on the line. Whether it's your families, if you're working national defense, friends, allies, and our war fighters. It is always going to be personal. And I didn't really think about that as much until I had this opportunity when I was working for another service. I had this golden opportunity to attend as a civilian this very specialized training for pilots. And it was a golden moment for me because what they were doing is they were giving civilians insight into the specific missions we were supporting and how our warfighters were working their mission. And all of this was supposed to help us connect with the warfighter, connect with their mission, and really feel what they're doing and apply that in our daily work as a civilian. And so it was really neat because they had not had civilians in this training course before, and I was one of the very first. So I show up and I stand out like a sore thumb. And I tried to sit in the back because I just wanted to be a fly on the wall, and I really wanted to take in the experience and not distract them from their work. And it didn't work very well. Everybody was looking. Nobody knew why I was there. I was too afraid to introduce myself and tell them. And then one day, I guess it was about the 3rd day in, um, this, uh, this really big warfighter came over, this pilot, and he just plopped down right next to me. And I could see him looking at me out of the corner of his eye. So I knew it was coming. I knew where we were going. He had been deemed the one. And finally, he whipped his head around and he said, "Who are you? And what are you doing here?" And so I explained to him who I was, the work that I did. And it was really neat because that's when all the heads in front of me swiveled back to look up, right? And there was this young man, and see, I'll never forget his face, this pilot, this warfighter. He turned around and looked at me, and he started popping off questions. And when I saw his face, what hit me was the incredible ask we have of our warfighters. He was so young, and here this young man was every day putting his life on the line for my freedoms. And I'm not really sure I would have felt comfortable giving him the keys to my car. He was he was a younger gentleman, and it hit me that every man and woman warfighter in there that had questions about the work that I did climbed in their cockpit, flew their mission with the expectation that I did my job every day with their lives on the line. So we expect our warfighter to be able to go out and execute his job flawlessly. We count on that. And of course they're going to do that. Their life is on the line. But when we're back, right, we're back in the office and we're building PowerPoints and talking design and making, assessments, we're a little bit separated from that. But that day, I really focused in because our warfighters, they know and they're very well trained on how to operate the equipment. But behind the panels, behind the buttons, behind the black boxes, that's my world. And he trusts me every day to remember that he is putting his life on the line. And so I carry that in my leadership every day, is that it's always personal, and my leadership better show it. My leadership better stay focused on that warfighter. Now, the difference becomes as a defense leader when you are dealing with the lives of others, right? You have to separate your personal gain. It's not about building your resume. It's not about how high you want to climb. It's about making sure that you are objective, you are clear, and every decision you made is on behalf of the warfighter, not you, not your team, no one else. The warfighter is what matters.
I am almost in tears over here because you just brought up so many different things. One, how with my passion for working with veterans and what I get to do, I think civilians take for granted the responsibility that each of these veterans carry on their shoulders every single day. So, for instance, mine carried that for 22 years of his career, the responsibility of every single American, every single day. Um, and the amount of leadership that it takes for you to do what you do and for each and every veteran to do what they do is just so powerful and amazing. But it also leaves great lessons for all of us, the civilian leaders, on how we should be treating one another. We should be cultivating the cultures in our organizations and treating our teams. Um, so not only did you hit on my passion about the veterans, but then you also hit on my human algorithm and leading at human speed because that's exactly what it is having that empathy, that adaptability, lead and lead effectively. You got me on a soapbox there for a second, but that was just an amazing story. So thank you so much for sharing that. That is the vulnerability that you just shared is just amazing.
Yeah, well, thank you. Sorry, you're welcome, and thank you for all the work you do with veterans. There are veterans in my family, Navy and Air Force, and so I truly appreciate the work they did.
Yes, every single day. So you just kind of segmented me into something about let's talk about women in defense. Um, so defense and engineering and advanced manufacturing spaces are still very male dominated. So what challenges did you face and how did you navigate them as a woman in a very male dominated industry?
Ugh, more vulnerability, right? And transparency. So, as a woman, I can tell you that I have experienced, a lot of the most obvious types of challenges you could expect, right?
Yes.
And I want to say up front that every entity I have supported, I believe, has done an incredible job training with awareness, um, and exposure to generate a good beneficial culture for our warfighter. But you're always gonna have 1 or 2.
And it's not just the defense industry. I've
Right.
got stories that I could tell as well.
But sometimes challenges aren't that obvious, right? And one particular incident that happened to me early in my career really impacted me for decades. And what had happened was I had gone off site to another location with my boss. I was a new engineer. I was excited. I was beside myself with, being able to get involved in all the great things that I wanted to do as a child or as a teenager back in the courtyard at Cocoa Beach High School. And I show up with my boss and we're, kind of in this room and it's all men. It's all men and me. It's all men and me. And the host, I'll never forget this, Sierra. And I can feel it like it was yesterday. He looked around the room, and his eyes kinda paused on me, and then he kept hopping, and then at the end of looking around, he said, "Who brought their secretary?" And the first thing I wanna say is this is no slight against our incredible administrative professionals. They are the backbone of so many organizations and keep everyone going. We couldn't do the work without them. But in that moment, what that did was plant a seed that I did not belong in the technical space, that I had earned my way into. And, 25 years ago, we really didn't have the languaging that we have now. And now I know what that was was actually the seed of imposter syndrome. And my boss was great. He's like, "What are you talking about? I've got an engineer over here." And so but that's not what I left with.
Exactly.
I didn't leave with, the fact that my boss defended me. I left with self-doubt. I left with a feeling that I was going to have to prove myself up front each and every day. And so, in fairness, it is absolutely fair to say I have not always handled the challenges the way I should have, the way I would have wanted to, the way I would now, right? So I took that little seed and I nurtured it and I fed it and I grew it, but I kept my head down and I made certain that I delivered. I let my work speak for me, and it wasn't until later I really began to grow in confidence and stop making myself small to make other people comfortable. So, I've done a lot better. I know how I would handle things now, but, as someone, I'm in my 50s, uh, and I was, grown up to be polite and, kids seen and not heard, and I took what he said and I ran with it, and every time someone else came along the way with a similar voice, I added to it. I added to it. So I hope that anyone listening now shakes those voices because nobody made them the divine decider on where you belong.
Absolutely. Wow. Powerful story, but something that I hope every woman listening, if you don't listen to this entire podcast, I hope you at least make it to minute 22:58. I'm going to put it on the record because you just basically talked about every story of every woman that has ever climbed the corporate ladder. I have similar stories, and you are right. Those voices are the voices that you hear in the back of the head when you're sitting in that meeting and you have that seat at the table, but you don't say what needs to be said because that voice is right here in your ear. And it's something that I am trying my best to teach my 18-year-old to overcome so that she doesn't spend her 20s and 30s like I did, constantly second guessing myself, having that inner voice that's telling me, why are you doing this? Why would you apply for that job? You don't have the credentials, you don't have the
Yeah,
skill sets. And it's
yeah,
the exact same thing that is holding women back from this proverbial glass ceiling that does not exist. And so you're the reason why I have started this podcast because I want conversations like this. I want honest, bold conversations to where women are learning that we're not apologizing anymore for being in the room. We're not apologizing for the way that we said or how we said things because if a man had said it the same way, nobody would get them backlash. So I I mean, really, we could probably end the podcast right here, but we're gonna keep going because you're just so interesting.
thank
I'm not gonna let you off the hook quite yet, but this is the type of conversation that I with women, and it's just so needed to just have real, honest conversation.
absolutely, and I'm so thankful that you're doing it.
So this leads me to my next question for you. What advice would you give women entering technical or defense fields today?
Oh, so, great question, and I wish that it was just a single mic drop moment, but it's a complicated environment, and so I think there's like 4 main pieces of advice I would give any young woman entering this area. One is that you should always stay mission focused. You're never gonna get too far from where you need to be if you've always got the war fighter, if that's the mission you're working, first and foremost in every action you take. Second is to find a mentor. And I don't just mean a mentor who may be the subject matter expert in your field. I'm talking about the kind of mentor who shows you how things really work behind the scenes, the stuff that goes on behind the org charts, and someone who advocates for you. If it's not a true relationship with your mentor, you're not going to, in my opinion, in my experience, get from that relationship what you really need for growth. They've got to be more than just tactical. They've also got to talk to you about the strategy of the environment that you're in. And then the third piece is to really understand your own triggers. We have a responsibility in the space to be the best version of ourselves. Understand how you react, how you respond to your environment, things someone may say, and learn tools. So, for example, I use breath work and meditation. Sometimes just a little bit of breath helps break that immediate response, and you can become more objective in a very short amount of time. And you can respond in a tense situation or a critical moment much more objectively with a lot more clarity. And then fourth, I learned this from my experience in momentum. That's part of the mentoring and training, right? So, informal mentoring within the organization, more formal mentoring and executive leadership programs. There was a particular session that was led by Dr. Sharon Melnick, and she is author of the book In Your Power. And she made me realize how often I was giving up my power at the table. And that goes back to the imposter syndrome that I had talked about earlier. And so I was staying quiet, or I was giving up my seat to someone else, at the table, in the guise of manners and politeness. And I'm not saying not to be polite. Being polite is fantastic. Um, but we're not paid to be quiet. I was doing a disservice to my organization by staying quiet and at times staying polite, because sometimes in critical environments, when the stakes are high, the dollars are high, there's taxpayer dollars, the stress is high, and it is just incredibly fast paced. Sometimes you have to say things that may not sound very polite on the surface, right? You've got to be able to say them. You've got to be able to stay in your power. You are being paid for your expertise. Do not do a disservice to the warfighter by remaining silent.
That is all really, really great advice. Um, and you're absolutely right. When you have the seat at the table, use your voice. Make sure they remember you were in the room. Take up space. That is something that I tell everyone. And I also want to kind of give some context to what Momentum is, because we've kind of mentioned it a few times. So Momentum is an amazing organization here in Alabama. It's Women Lead. And so that is how I had the opportunity to meet Denise and a ton of other amazing women. And the mentorship program that they do is amazing. And then there's um, WEDC, Women's Economic Development Council. I believe that's what that one stands for. That is also here in Huntsville, Alabama. And then I'm also on the board for Women in Manufacturing, and they have a mentorship program. Leadership Greater Huntsville and all the other. So I think mentorship is amazing, especially for those women that are in early and middle career to kind of help them navigate spaces and elevate their leadership. But I also ask to those that are already in the C-suite and those that are in those top level leadership positions, you have a duty to lead others. Like it's not a calling. We're not asking you to. We're telling you you're supposed to be leading others. So please reach out to these organizations. I know I can help you get in contact with any of these, but you have time to be a mentor, okay? I don't care how busy you are. There's always time to mentor and lead another woman. So please take advantage of these amazing organizations. And thank you for that amazing advice because that's advice that everybody can use. I can always use a reminder to use my voice in my spaces. So this kind of leads me into the next set of questions that I wanted to ask you because you recently just transitioned into your new role. So after leading major initiatives inside government, what motivated you to move to your new role that you now have with Ironville Ventures?
So that was actually a very hard decision. I supported an incredible greater picture mission in the government about, defending the nation and our allies and our war fighters. It was huge and it was powerful. But in my particular role, I had become very comfortable. And I wanted to be able to serve the war fighter in a broader sense. So our founder and president, Mr. Scott Wilson, asked me to come over and grow Iron Will Ventures equities in industrial-based resiliency. So that could be scaling up production. It could be developing advanced technologies. It could be assessing risk or just working strategies with both government and industry to solve some of our most critical problems in our defense market. And Mr. Wilson was very strategic in how he established the organization so we could execute both strategically and with a tactical flavor as well.
Awesome, and congratulations on that new role. And I love that you said that you got comfortable because one of my favorite quotes is get comfortable with being uncomfortable because that forces you to grow. It forces you to do it scared and step out into things that we would normally. So congratulations to you for taking that leap and recognizing that, at there comes a point in your career sometimes when you've done all that you can do and be successful with that particular role, that particular company. And so instead of just staying there and being sedentary, move on to the next big great adventure of your life and continue to grow in your career. So I love that you said that. So, how does your leadership lens change when you're influencing ecosystems rather than programs?
Okay, so, as you could imagine, you have to have the ability to look much longer term with a much broader aperture. So, when you're working ecosystems, you're working with a diverse set of backgrounds, different agencies, organizations, companies, different cultures, different needs, different environments, different schedules. Everything is different. And so you've got to be able to collaborate and coordinate. You've got to be able to communicate clearly and empathetically and openly to bring all of these people together for a common outcome and best suited to the entire ecosystem. Whereas within a program, you have a few more guardrails in place where you're executing. So you blow that up, you blow out the guardrails, and the network just becomes immense. And I love that. It's so nuanced, and there's so much to learn when you're working in these environments and working to bring everyone together for a common goal.
I am so glad you explained that in that context because one of the things with working with the veteran programs is I am in charge of creating this veteran ecosystem across the state that's never been done before. Um, and so in my past roles, I always had programs, and with those programs came parameters, and I knew exactly what point A, point B, and point C looked like. And I worked well within that box. And so now having the opportunity to just envision and imagine what I want this to look like and have the fluidity to just dream as big as I want to and try to see what I can cultivate out of that. It is an amazing feeling of freedom, but then you also kind of realize how much that the leaders must have in me to see my ability to create this, right? And so that kind of quiets the noise a little bit on days when I need that extra motivation and I'm like, what the heck am I doing? Can I really do this? Am I dreaming too big? But then I'm like, no, they have given you the tools and to set you free. I'm a bird out of a cage right now. They think that you can do it. So go ahead and go for it. Then if this part fails, then find something else that works, but that ability to be able to fail if I need to, grow, and then also be successful all in the same scope. It's just a feeling I've never had before.
I love that for you. That's really exciting because, your success is not about the number of failures, right? It's about how many times you got back up and just, I love that you're breaking through the limits of how you had previously framed your thinking and just knocking down all those walls.
And I see you doing the same kind of knocking down. So I'm excited for you in this new role, and I know you're going to kill it for sure.
Thank you.
So now this is part of our conversation that takes us to the human algorithm moment where we talk about empathy, adaptability, and connection. So, and you've hinted a little bit about your empathy that you've had to have in different roles. So, how does empathy show up in environments driven by data, risk, and performance?
Oh, sure. So no matter how much data is around you, how much analysis, risk, whatever, your people are still your greatest asset, right? And as a leader, you have to be able to connect with your people. You have to be transparent. And your empathy is showing up in understanding the stresses and the challenges that your staff is under or that your leadership is under as well, right? Because we all know that leadership is not about organizational position. You can lead from below. And so your leadership has to become more open and aware. And, you can make sound technical decisions, but the execution is always human. And so your leadership decisions can fall flat, even if they are technically accurate or technically sound. If you're not paying attention to the needs of your organization, if you're not understanding the people who have to step up and support you when we may not have all the information, if you're not hearing them and you're not setting that safe environment for them, then they're not going to be as likely to support you in the times of high risk. So, empathy connects you to the people, it connects you to the ecosystem. It is what allows you to strategize to a common goal. If I'm working with someone in an ecosystem environment and they feel that I'm not being empathetic to their needs, their situation, things that they are not in control of, and I'm making decisions that impact them, they are not going to step forward and help as a unit move either a project or a program or a risk or a need. You know, nothing will move forward without empathy and trust.
Very well said. And so when I one day write the book called The Human Algorithm, I'm going to need you to requote all of this in the book, okay? Because that was perfectly stated.
I can't wait to read your book.
That's way down the road, way, way, way down the road. So, what moments in your career required you to adapt quickly, and what did they teach you? I know there's probably a thousand, so just pick one.
There is one that stands out above all others, and it was actually my step into leadership. We talked about Denise and imposter syndrome, and I kept my head down, and I was a technical cog in the wheel, right? I kept things moving, I did my technical work, and I had never really considered other roles. I'd never really thought about, stepping up into a leadership position. Well, life had other plans for me, and we had some organizational changes, and it was wonderful because we had the most amazing director at the time. I mean, he was nationally known, probably internationally known, and just the kindest, man that took care of his team. Everybody wanted to work for him. He came up to me and he said, "Denise, I would like for you to be my deputy." Oh, hot dog, right? You know, that's the next step, right? So that's an easy step. I'll get to learn from the best. I was so excited. Well, a couple of weeks later, um, life happened, and this gentleman announced that he was going to leave the organization. And, I had a bless your heart moment because I looked at him and I said, "Well, who are they gonna bring in to take your spot?" I'm sitting over here thinking, I've been at the seat for like 4 weeks now. So I'm sitting there thinking, I really hope it's someone nice like you, nervous. And I'll never forget his response where he just looked at me and I just he had this look of, "She doesn't know. She doesn't know. She doesn't see it coming." And he goes, "Well, Denise, I don't really know, but if I had to guess, I would prepare if I were you." And I'm like, "Prepare for what?" And he said, "Prepare for you to step up." And I said, "Well, okay." And so that's what I did. That was the biggest challenge of my entire career, was stepping from being a technical person and very rapidly taking over the charge of leading multi-million dollar initiatives. And the unique thing in that situation too was the people that were now supporting me were, 2 months ago, they were my peers. And so I had a lot to prove. I really had a lot to prove, and I'm so thankful now. Um, it was a hard year, that first year, but I am so thankful because that was the start of shedding that imposter syndrome, and I will have walked away from that experience knowing that I was meant for so much more than I ever thought of. I can do anything. Nothing really scares me anymore. Like, someone can, throw something my way and it may not be in my area of expertise, but I have no problem taking it on, and I will, I'll get it done, or I'll get her done, as we say here in the South. Um, so that just really did a lot for my confidence in shedding that imposter syndrome.
Thank you so much for sharing that amazing story. Because I think a lot of us have had that one moment where we just had to put skin to the wind and figure it out. But that is probably one of the biggest ways, especially for me, that I have built confidence in who I am and the woman that I am and the woman that I'm becoming. Because there have been days, especially working, coming from the staffing industry, working on projects where in the automotive industry, which is again very male dominated, where it was solely my responsibility to bring in 300 people to help build an engine shop or else they could not produce cars, like that kind of pressure. And I
Mhm.
remember there were days when I would sit in my car and cry and talk to Jesus and be like, I can't do this. What lesson am I supposed to be learning here today? Why am I doing this? And then everything would be fine. And I'd be like, oh, I could do that again tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know, you have
Yeah.
to have your 15 minutes, just cry it all out, scream, shout, get all your frustrations out. And then once it's over, you're like, oh, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Or look at how you overcame that. So now that gives you the fuel for the next big mountain of crap that's coming your way.
Absolutely. And if I can step up into a role like that from just a pure technical standpoint, I have no doubt that anybody listening to your podcast can do the same.
Absolutely, 100%. I love it. So let's talk about connection. How do relationships and trust factor into moving complex systems forward?
Yeah, they're critical, right? So relationships are really that part that happens behind the scenes. You know who to call, you know how to make something happen. And if you don't have that trust, like we discussed previously, everyone's going to be postured in a defensive move, right? And your relationship becomes transactional. Without trust, honesty is not on the table, problems are not openly talked about, or at least to the level of detail that you need to. And so then you're never able to fully solve a problem without relationships and trust. This is beyond the org charts. This is beyond any policy documents. This is about people because remember, we talked about strategy is logical for the most part, but execution is always human. And that's where your trust and relationships.
Beautifully stated. Love it. So, when you look back on your career, what impact do you hope your leadership has made beyond the programs and the budgets?
All right. So this one's actually a little bit difficult to talk about. Um, I will say first and foremost, I hope and pray that something I have done in my career made a difference for the warfighter when the warfighter needed it. That's number one. Number two, I hope I made something a little easier for someone else along the way. But the main impact personally outside of the warfighter was kind of brought full circle for me in a particular moment that happened during my leadership. Um, we hired this gentleman to come in. Um, he was a technical expert. We knew him with work outside, you know, in other programs and projects. We knew he had the technical chops to be on the team. And so when we had an opportunity to bring him in, we were incredibly excited. So I'd had a few conversations with this gentleman, and I won't name names for privacy purposes. But as a leader, technical acumen was not the only thing I cared about. I care about, how he fits in with the team, right? So, anytime, no matter where you are in your team development, if you bring someone new in, you go immediately back to that forming stage, right? And so I would use my staff calls, and this was, back when COVID was still going on and stuff like that. But I would use my staff call to put kind of a finger on the pulse of the group and watch the dynamics because as I'd mentioned before, I knew most of them for years and had been was still friends with them, but now I had a different role to serve. And so I was always looking to make sure that there were no frictions, things were moving pretty smoothly. And then when this gentleman came on board, I wanted to see the interaction. So, we're sitting at staff call, and this gentleman was incredibly polite. I mean, he was he was top notch in his area. I mean, he could have come in and broken glass and bulldozed his way around, and he was just this quiet, calm presence. When he spoke with me, he was always, "Yes, ma'am," "No, ma'am," just he was born with manners, right? Just incredible. But what I noticed about him that was so much fun was how he would interact quietly with the team, right? So I would see this gentleman, smiling, giggling. I mean, the guys were cutting up and they were just having a good time. And I let them, even though it's not the most efficient way to run a staff call, I wanted to see the dynamics. And so this gentleman just made incredible impact on the team. He made incredible impact for me and the mission and just as a person and, always setting an example of respect and top-notch behavior in an organization. Um, there were some organizational shifts that there always are, and that particular group got moved over into another organization, but we were all still kinda close. And I received an email one day that this gentleman had been in an accident and had passed away. And I was devastated, and I knew that the team that he worked with was devastated, so I reached out to them, and we all got together, and we went to his funeral, and he lived way out. I mean, he was way out there, so, uh, you know, I had not had an opportunity to meet his family or anything like that. So we go up and we're in the line, and I step up to his widow, and I don't know why in the world it just had never occurred to me that she may know who I am. Why would she? But I stepped up to her and I introduced myself and I expressed my sympathies and how wonderful he was and how much he meant to our team. And she looked at me, with just this incredible look. And she goes, "Ma'am, I know who you are." And I'm sure my eyes got big because I didn't know what was coming next. And she said, "My husband had great respect for you and he enjoyed working for you." And at that moment, I was so grateful and relieved, but it came full circle that after the meetings, after the assessment, when the lights go out and the doors close on the building, my leadership is part of someone else's story. And I always want that story to be something I can be proud of. And I really took that moment as an opportunity to reflect. I thought about what I had done right with this gentleman. And let's be honest, he was easy. I didn't really have to do a whole lot, right? But how was I showing up for others that may have different personalities. How was I showing up for them? And so I took the opportunity to really reflect on my leadership so far. Um, and honestly, there was an incident that had happened, uh, and I'll tell you, I am harder on myself than anyone else can be. But I use this as a chance to improve. And with the incident that had occurred previously, that I wasn't quite proud of my leadership in that moment, I reached out and made amends. And I said, I am so sorry. You deserve better. My bad day is not your bad day. And it is my job to be that buffer between the bad day above us and the work you're doing to support the mission. And so as I lead other people, when they go home, I want to know that the story is good.
Thank you for sharing such a beautiful story of leadership, vulnerability. That's amazing. And it's also a true testament to the type of leader that you are. You're just an amazing woman, an amazing leader. And I think that you will have no problem going to sleep at night knowing that you have done your best and that you showed up as your best leader and your best self every single day when you show up. That is just an amazing story. And that's just something that makes you feel good. We all want to leave that legacy. And it means so much more when it comes from that unexpected person. And I appreciate every time someone gives me a compliment about anything that I'm doing, anything leadership wise. But when it comes from someone that you really don't even know, but you've affected them in some type of way, in a positive way, that carries so much weight. And so that's amazing that apparently he was talking positive about you to his spouse and to his family and his friends. And she already knew who you were before you even walked in the room. That's amazing.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. It was a surprise. I just never considered that. And so, as new leaders step up, you really got to think about, what's the story they're taking home.
100%. And that's great advice. I don't know how we've gotten here, but we're at the last question. I know. What is one truth about women in leadership that the world isn't ready to hear but absolutely needs to?
I believe that we've done good work getting women to the table, but I do not believe as a society that we've done a good job empowering women at the table. And I don't mean this as something that is a male responsibility. And and I'm going to say there are entities that have done a good job, right? There are. But many times I've seen women sitting at the table and they're not really treated in the same way with the same considerations. Maybe they're not asked for their input. There's a lot of work that we need to do as a society because women in leadership is not about changing women. It's about preparing the system for the women to bring their unique skill sets for the betterment of all. The warfighter will be stronger if we are working together and everyone is empowered.
Amazingly spoken. I love everything you just said. My heart is exploding in my chest, even though you can't see it right now. You were saying everything that I needed to hear and that hopefully our listeners are wanting to hear as well today. Denise, thank you for reminding us that leadership doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like building systems that protect, sustain, and move our nation forward. Your work is a powerful example of what happens when women lead with expertise, courage, and vision. I am so honored that you took this hour today to be on my little podcast. Denise, it has been a great getting to know you, and this conversation has just been amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sierra. I appreciate the opportunity, and I look forward to all the work you're going to be doing.
Thank you, Denise. And thank you all for listening to the She Suite. We'll see you next time.